Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Sunday, everybody. Today's episode is an extra episode for the week. There was so much to discuss from this week that we have this extra episode today. We'll be back to regular episodes from tomorrow. As usual, it's the weekend, so we'll have a focus on foreign affairs, but we end today's video with discussions of the Chinese economy. And first up, we discuss salient developments in India-China relations. On Thursday, it was reported that a unit of Indian soldiers previously assigned to the country's western border has been sent aside to protect a stretch of its frontier with China. In addition to these new soldiers, an existing 9,000 troops already at the Chinese border will be brought under a new fighting command. The combined force will guard a roughly 530-kilometre, 330-mile stretch of border that separates the Tibetan region of the PRC with India's northern states. At a regular press briefing in Beijing on Friday, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said that this move will only increase tensions. Quote, India enhancing military deployments in the India-China border areas does not help ease the situation in the border areas or in safeguarding tranquility and safety. China is committed to working with India to safeguard the tranquility and stability of the border areas. End quote. UK-based Financial Times writes that India's unprecedented assignment of troops, backed by their own artillery and air support, to the stretch of the border highlights both the region's strategic importance and its growing sensitivity in the eyes of India's leaders. In 2021, India repositioned an extra 50,000 soldiers to patrol the border after a deadly clash the year before left at least 20 Indian soldiers dead and seriously strained ties which remain strained today. These two giants are engaging in a long-term geopolitical struggle, with China pressuring India at both north and south. And in the south, we move now to the Maldives. This week, Maldives President Mohamed Morsi, who is widely seen to be pro-China, announced that India is set to pull out its first batch of military personnel from the Maldives today, Sunday, a move which commentators say is a sign of the Indian Ocean island nation moving closer to China. It does appear that some rescue and reconnaissance aircraft and the Indian personnel to maintain them will still remain in the Maldives, however. UK-based BBC writes that India has long wielded influence over the Maldives, quote, whose strategic location in its backyard allowed it to monitor a crucial part of the Indian Ocean. But the relationship between the countries has soured over the past few months, partly due to Mr. Morsi's strong rhetoric against Delhi. It's a gap China is looking to exploit as the Asian powers jostle for influence in the region. End quote. Delhi adds that some analysts warn that the Maldives, a nation with just over 500,000 people, faces the risk of being caught up in the Asian power rivalry. China has loaned more than $1 billion to the Maldives over the years, mostly for infrastructure and economic development. Earlier this week, the Maldivian government signed a so-called military assistance agreement with China that has caused some concern in Delhi. Azim Zahir, a Maldivian political analyst, told the outlet, quote, this is unprecedented. It's the first time the Maldives has signed a defense agreement with Beijing to provide military assistance. End quote. Adding, quote, we know that the president would forge closer ties with China in terms of investment and capital, but no one expected him to go to this extent. End quote. The great Sino-Indian game thus will play out in both the mountains and the oceans alike. Next up, US-China developments. We already covered several updates in this space this week, but there are a few further developments to touch on today. This week, US-based Wall Street Journal published a widely shared report on Thursday on Beijing's so-called Document 79, part of a years-long push for China to de-Americanize its IT stack. The piece is called China Intensifies Push to Delete America from Its Technology, and we quote selected excerpts from the piece directly. For American tech companies in China, the writing is on the wall. It's also on paper, in Document 79. The 2022 Chinese government directive expands a drive that is muscling US technology out of the country, an effort some refer to as Delete A for Delete America. Document 79 was so sensitive that high-ranking officials and executives were only shown the order and weren't allowed to make copies. People familiar with the matter said it requires state-owned companies in finance, energy, and other sectors to replace foreign software in their IT systems by 2027. Officials in Beijing issued Document 79 in September of 2022, as the US was ratcheting up chip export restrictions and sanctions on Chinese technology companies. It requires state-owned firms to provide quarterly updates on their progress in replacing foreign software used for email, human resources, and business management with Chinese alternatives. The directive came down from the agency overseeing the country's massive state-owned enterprise sector, a group that includes more than 60 of China's 100 largest listed companies. Here ends the direct quote of this article. Now, while we're on US-China relations, as the two sessions were meeting this week, China's top diplomat, Wang gave a long speech on China's foreign policy outlook for this year. It's worth noting his comments on the United States, which appear as truculent as ever. Quote, "It has been pointed out that US misperception towards China continues, and US promises are not truly fulfilled. The US has been devising various tactics to suppress China and kept lengthening its unilateral sanctions lists, reaching bewildering levels of unfathomable absurdity. If the US says one thing and does another, where is its credibility as a major country? If it gets jittery whenever it hears the word China, where is its confidence as a major country? If it only wants itself to prosper but denies other countries' legitimate development, where is international fairness? If it persistently monopolizes the high end of the value chain and keeps China at the low end, where is fairness and competition? The challenge for the US comes from itself, not from China." End quote. Of course, statements like this once again remind us that we should not expect any meaningful warming of US-China relations anytime soon. Next up, we move to the economy. But just quickly, if you're enjoying today's episode of China Update, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Liking and subscribing are the only ways in which the channel can grow, and is a huge help for me. And for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable, I rely primarily on subscriber support to keep going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Last year, Jin Keyu published a book called The New China Playbook, Beyond Socialism and Capitalism, in which she set out to, in her own words, correct Western stereotypes of China. Jin is a Harvard-educated Chinese economist, associate professor of economics at the London School of Economics, and a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. She is also the daughter of Jin Liqun, an economist and politician who previously served as the Vice Minister of Finance of China and is currently president of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. This is to say, Jin is very much a member of both the Chinese and Western elite, and well versed in economics and politics. Her book caused a stir among Western intellectual, policymaking, and political circles. Tony Blair, for example, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, called Jin a brilliant thinker. Many praised the book as giving a nuanced perspective on the Chinese economy, something that is critically needed as the US and the wider West move towards closer competition and potential conflict with China. Others have pushed back, however, and one of the most thoughtful such pushbacks came from Huang this week in a special book review in US outlet Foreign Affairs called Chinese Exceptionalism Just Won't Die. The idea of a special Chinese model rings increasingly hollow. Huang is also a Western-educated Chinese expert, a professor of global economics and management at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Sloan School of Management, and a current fellow at the Wilson Center. We end today's video by examining some of Huang's critiques of Jin's new book, which we quote selected excerpts from directly. Jin's book gets many things right. Her rebuttal of the Western notion that China is a mere technological copycat that mimics the West is right on target. She also offers a fascinating portrayal of elite urban Chinese millennials like herself, a generation that grew up surrounded not by siblings, but by prosperity and a fusion of modern aspirations and traditional Confucian values. Yet while parts of Jin's book are measured, for instance, she writes that the China model is still trial and error, the overall tone of the New China Playbook is mistakenly celebratory. In her account, China's unique system of political economy has powered its magnificent growth. This is deeply disconnected with China's current reality of a reeling economy, a tanking stock market, and massive capital flight out of the country. In fact, many of China's problems today are a direct result of the China playbook, for which Jin so emphatically advocates. Any serious book on China's growth should grapple with the validity of its official GDP data. In 2023, China reported 5.2% in GDP growth, a performance flagrantly inconsistent with its high unemployment rate, falling exports, and failing real estate sector. At the lower end of outside analysis, an estimate from Rodian Group puts the true growth rate at 1.5%. Jin only mentions the data issue in passing. Although she notes that provincial GDP data is often overstated, she still characterizes China's growth as miraculous. Even former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has questioned the official figures. Li once reportedly stated that he did not trust China's GDP data, and in 2020, he disclosed that around 40% of the population lived on a monthly income of $141. As an aside, that's less than $5 a day, essentially refuting his own government's pronouncement that it had eliminated absolute poverty. The data issue is not a mere technicality either. It undermines the heart of Jin's argument. She posits that China's growth is so spectacular that we need to invent a brand new paradigm to understand it. The Chinese system, she argues, relies on a legacy of Confucianism, its singular ability to harness government power and state control of finance. That system, she proclaims, is beyond socialism and capitalism. This is a bold and revolutionary thesis. But if China's achievement is comparable to other successful economies, as independent data suggests, a less heroic explanation would suffice. China has possessed abundant state power and Confucianism for thousands of years, and state ownership since 1949. But it only began to grow after 1978. What changed is that Beijing introduced market reforms, encouraged entrepreneurship, and opened up to foreign capital and trade, topics that receive only sporadic attention in Jin's book. Jin attributes China's economic growth to what she calls the mayor economy. In this system, local governments control major resources and market opportunities, but they are just as economically rational and motivated to support efficient projects as any private investor. For an academic economist, this claim is startling. It is directly contradicted by abundant evidence in existing economics literature that China's financial system favors state-owned enterprises at the expense of private firms, and that these enterprises are less productive than private firms. If we compare different regions within China, the evidence is also clear. Regions that are closest to Jin's state-centric playbook, such as those in China's northeast, are less productive. Regions that are more market-driven, such as Guangdong and Zhejiang, are more dynamic and efficient. Jin's mayor economy has misallocated capital. Another massive cost, hidden by those exposed only to China's glittery urban skylines and infrastructure, is the staggering challenge rural China faces in education and healthcare. As a 2017 headline in Science magazine states, 1 in 3 Chinese children faces an education apocalypse. In their 2020 book Invisible China, the authors paint an alarming picture of the state of rural China. Based on a detailed survey of data and years of careful field research, their team found that over half of rural babies are undernourished, and more than half of toddlers are so developmentally delayed that their IQs may never exceed 90. As the main author told Science, this is the biggest problem China is facing that no one's ever heard about. This is a fundamental problem of Jin's mayor economy. The mayors, while busy picking and choosing business projects, neglect to provide and strengthen essential public goods such as education and healthcare, a duty only a government is responsible for. This China appears invisible to Jin, whose book does not even nod at the problem. Instead, Jin reserves her strongest critique of the Chinese system for its paternalistic style of financial management. Paternalism is the least of the system's problems. Jin ignores the prevalence of insider trading and debilitating corruption in Chinese regulatory process. Nor does she address the far larger issue that China's state-owned banks have clouded its growth prospects by fueling a deeply troubled real estate sector, funding inefficient state-owned enterprises, and putting China's debt-to-GDP ratio close to 300%, one of the highest among major economies. Chinese savers and investors would be fortunate if the state was truly paternalistic. In reality, the state has long permitted, or even encouraged, risk-taking. Under Xi's powerful leadership, China's once vibrant private sector is struggling. Jin dismisses the rule of law as irrelevant for China, but business executives seem to disagree. The sweeping crackdown on the private sector and arbitrary detentions have contributed to foreign and domestic capital exiting China en masse and a slowing in private investments. Recently, there has been a surge of Chinese immigrants attempting to illegally enter the United States, many of them middle-class professionals fearing repression at home. Jin is confident that China's political system is best for the country, arguing that Chinese people with their Confucian values have a cultural affinity with autocracy. She cites the latest World Values Survey for 2017 through 2022, in which 93% of Chinese respondents placed security ahead of freedom, compared with 28% of US respondents. But this is a selective use of the data. Many respondents from democratic societies also valued security ahead of freedom. This includes Taiwan, 86%, and Japan, 82%, both of which have Confucian tradition, proving that Confucianism and democracy are fully compatible. Democracy, human rights, and the rule of law are not a Western fixation. They are also relevant to the lives and aspirations of Chinese people, just like economic growth and personal security. 8 years before Jin came to the United States, millions of Chinese citizens demonstrated in Beijing and other cities to demand democracy and the rule of law. Here ends the direct quote of Huang's critique of Jin's book, The New China Playbook, Beyond Socialism and Capitalism. I would very much like to hear your thoughts on both Jin's arguments as well as Huang's critique in the comments below. But with that, we end today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I hope you have a good Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I will see you all back for another week of China Update tomorrow on Monday.